And the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Mayor Scott Tremblay.
Here.
Vice Mayor William Dittmer.
Here.
Councilwoman Jenny Sorrell.
Here.
Councilman Todd McClary.
Here.
Councilman Tom Kinsella.
Here.
City Attorney James Matthew.
Here.
City Manager John Duke.
Here. Thank you. At this time, we're going to open up with comments from the general public. At this time, we have Mr. Mueller signed up. Welcome. Come on up.
Hey everybody, Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. Thank you for having the opportunity to have this discussion. What I'd like to do first off is to request a line item in the budget for canal maintenance. And I think if we could start with something and grow upon that and eventually lead to better water quality in our bayou, in our river, I think that's the right thing to do, and the best way to begin is by just starting. And you know, for so long the city has done really nothing in regard to that, and I'd like to say, make a bold move. Why don't you give it a try? In addition, had some residents discuss to me about what they're seeing in their tax bill. And we're kind of confused with the 10.85 number that's in the center columns of the recent bill. And I explained to them that was just a mathematical calculation, but that you were looking at lowering the rate, not raising the rate. So I put that individual hopefully to rest. He was supposed to be here tonight because evidently he went back and revisited that. So. Might be something that we can announce on our Facebook page and maybe give the citizens more notice of what's going on so that they could be informed as well. One other area of concern, and I've brought this up before, and Rachel was kind enough to provide, I guess, a headcount report in numbers. But I think we really owe it to ourselves, since this is the largest line item in our budget, a fully loaded labor rate for all the departments, and understand where our costs have gone with that year over year, marrying the costs and the physical FTEs associated with those year over year, and really look at what's going on there. It is our largest expenditure when you figure you have benefits, you have retirement, you have taxes, overtime of all the departments, and you know I think we're not doing an adequate job looking at opportunities to change that. Year over year, what I saw was about a 3-person increase in the head count, is what the chart that she sent me reflected. But trying to get at the actual dollars that's impacting, all the accounts have to be aggregated in a way so that you can compare what the total is over year. I just think it since it's the largest item, it probably behooves us to kind of look at that and see where our expenditures are going. Are there ways to change that, and are there ways to improve our efficiency with the number of people? For example, you know, we're spending, you know, I'm just picking numbers here, 20 police and 20 firemen, fire personnel. Is that the right number? Have we done any analysis to determine whether we've got the right mix in the right groups? And it behooves, it begs the question, should we look into that for a city this size with our issues Has any analysis been done to determine what the appropriate amount is? Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Nobody else has signed up at this time. Nobody else from the general public is here. At this time, I'm going to pass it to our city manager, Mr. Dute, for any comments.
Just brief reminder, on the 9th at 5:30, we'll have our first budget public hearing. On the 14th, regularly scheduled council meeting at 7 o'clock. We'll also have a CRA board meeting on the 14th. And then again on the 23rd at 5:30, our final public hearing for the budget. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. This time I'm going to go around any comments before we get into council business. And I'll start with Vice Mayor.
I don't have any comments.
Councilwoman Sorrell.
I'm fine, thank you.
Mr. McCleary.
I have nothing.
Councilman
And
Kinsella.
I'll jump in when I see
Okay.
the part.
And I was going to make just a brief comment. What I'd like to do, we have several different areas of the budget that we have to cover. What I'd like to do is break it down by fund and go one fund at a time. CRA, you have your utility or enterprise fund, and then our general fund. So I think that's going to be the best way to break down the conversation. Before we have a chance to talk on each item, I'm going to have Rachel just give a factual overlay of where we're at. Fund balances, what we're budgeted, if it's balanced, so on and so forth. And then I'm going to pass it to our city manager, Mr. Dute, for any recommendations that he may have. And then we'll open the discussion on each item after that. Is that okay with everybody format-wise? Okay. So at this time, we're going to move on to council business, and that's going to be the review of the upcoming budget for this year. And where would you like to start, Rachel?
So the first item in the budget packet was the utility fund, so we can start there if you'd like.
Okay, perfect.
So the first item is the water and sewer capital projects that we listed out. We tried to prioritize them, and actually the last time that an engineering study was done on the capital projects was back in November of 2005. And as you can see on the list, any of them that have a CIP and a number, those are actually from that book. So they were never finished. This was actually a 10-year plan, I believe. So they were never completed. So that's why they're included in this plan as well. And then we try to prioritize, like I said, based on fiscal year that we anticipate that they would need to be done. So I know you know that we're anticipating a rate study for utilities and stormwater, and within that rate study, we'd like to do a capital improvement plan, a formal one by an engineering firm. So Pasco County recently went out to bid for that similar item, and they came up with Stantec as the winning bid. So we're looking into that, and we actually will be discussing it with them on Thursday, the potential.
Do we know what the cost is going to be so we can put it in as a line item?
They just provided hourly rates for each of their employees and what they charge. So we don't know how many hours each aspect would take, but that's what we'll be discussing on Thursday.
Is there at least an estimation? Because what I want to do is be able to put a line item in for the cost of that service so we can have it budgeted properly if we can.
Right. Unfortunately, I don't know how many hours
Okay.
each item, because it would be a bunch of different items that they would have to perform.
I think a rough estimate somewhere in the 25 to 30,000 range.
Okay,
But that's a
It's,
a
yeah.
guess.
fair enough. Is the council okay by consensus putting that as a line item so we can have that study done and look at all those issues, whether the CIP plan, rate study, and all the above?
I think I have to abstain from this conversation. I do a lot of work with Stantec.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should have it in there.
I agree.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is see if we can add that as a line item, budget item for our enterprise fund, because that's the fund we're talking about at this point, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. What do you know what our fund balances are for those various funds?
Yes. So for the utilities, our FY20 ending fund balance was about $1,026,000. Oh, sorry. For the utilities, our FY20 ending fund balance was about $1,026,000, and I projected around $1 million that we end up with, which is why we need to have a rate study. We're kind of going into the red in that fund. So, and that's about 25% of the fund balance to the budget.
Okay. And that's just dealing with utilities or water.
Correct.
Does that cover, that doesn't cover sewer and or stormwater, does
So
it?
that's water and sewer.
And sewer.
Stormwater is a separate fund.
Okay, understood. I guess while we're on the stormwater fund, are there any other, I think there was a new item that was listed that I added, or I asked to speak about at the last meeting, and that was the 2 trucks.
Yes, we also included that in the budget packet.
Okay. And is this the appropriate place to talk about that? Is there, I think, utility trucks, so this would be the proper area in the budget?
Yeah.
Is that correct, Mr. Duke?
Yeah.
Okay. So at this time, if you guys are okay, I wanted to talk about the issue of the 2 trucks for the utilities, since I believe we're in the right area for that. And with that, I wanted to actually pass that issue to Mr. Duke for introduction and any recommendations he may have for us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's, as you can tell, staff's put a lot of effort into providing the numbers that you were looking for, and my assumption is you've all read that and studied it very well. Obviously, the 2 trucks that we're talking about, the crane truck and a vac truck, are used regularly, almost daily. The vac truck was out today working on a water leak. The vac truck in particular is used across multiple departments. And, you know, as we worked over the ideas last week, there are options. There's costs, both in time and money, to some of the alternatives. So my strong recommendation is on almost a daily basis, and at times under emergent circumstances, a vac truck is something we need to have in our stable. When the lift station overflowed on the west side of town, we had that truck and personnel there within 30 minutes of receiving the notice. That was a period of heavy rain. If we'd have been asking for somebody else to loan us a truck, we wouldn't have gotten one until their heavy rain problems went away. So that vac truck is used on water leaks, on sewer leaks, and when it's time to utilize that truck, you know, we had a water leak on Green this afternoon, and used the vac truck, keep the hole clear while the guys work on the leak. If we were to go out and try to rent one or try to borrow one, you know, those are possibilities. But if it takes us, you know, if they've got a 4-hour response time, that's 4 hours more that folks are going to be without water. So I don't think the vac truck typically is going to approach a life and death kind of circumstance, but definitely a quality of life. If your water's out of service for 2 hours, that's different than if it's out of service for 6 or 8. So, and in those high rain situations, one of the things that you know, has really struck me is the ability of our guys to respond in a very timely manner when we're dealing with sewage, then plays into the reporting we do with the state. And if we have a sewer overflow or a sewer spill and we've got it under control within 30 minutes or 60 minutes, that's a very different report to the state than if we're sitting there for 4 hours waiting for a truck to show up. You know, volume. There are, I don't know what they are, but there's benchmarks that the state has, and at some point they send us bills and fine us. And I'd really like to avoid that. So I guess all of that wrapped up, if the information that staff has put together is sufficient to justify, my recommendation is, one, the crane truck, we've got the cash. We buy the crane truck immediately. The vac truck.
And can I ask you to clarify, when you say purchase immediately, out of which fund balance?
There's penny for Pasco money is available for that. I'd look at Rachel if she has other ideas about that, but
Yeah, I mean, it is mostly used for utility fund projects, so I would say it should probably come from the utility fund.
Spread it across utilities.
Yeah, and equipment like that should be included in the capital improvement plan, because really that fund should be supporting any equipment that it needs to utilize for its projects.
So that expense, instead of penny for Pasco, you're talking about coming out of the enterprise fund?
Correct, yes,
And we have $1 million fund balance, so we can afford it?
correct.
Okay.
The vac truck is a little bigger purchase, $400,000 to $500,000. Now, while we have the cash to write a check for that, I think it'd be more prudent to finance that. If at any time you got tired of paying interest, you can always pay it off, but that leaves you flexibility over the next several years. You're making your payments on your truck, but you have it available immediately. So my recommendation would be buy the crane truck, pay cash for it, lease purchase the vac truck, pay for that up. I think we had a 7-year term that was committed to us. And like I said, if you get tired of paying the interest, we still have the cash to write a check for it and pay it off. But I think that gives you flexibility over that 7-year term. Both of those trucks, I don't know if we talked about this last week. I didn't realize until I spent some more time with staff. You know, Richie had told me we take the crane truck out and we pull pumps. I thought that meant we were pulling pumps when they needed to be replaced. We actually pull pumps for maintenance. Unhook the pump, lift it out of the hole, do the maintenance on the pump, pipes, put the pump back in the hole, and screw it back together. We do that 10 times a week. 10 times a week we pull a pump out of the hole. Now, not all of our pumps overload our crane truck, but the ones that do, we have to either borrow or rent a crane truck big enough to pull that pump out. So that's like I said, I didn't realize until I spent some time talking to Richie and Sal that that's not just an emergency, we have to replace the pump. That's maintenance, and we do that a couple of times a day. And when it's the bigger pumps, we either borrow or rent a truck to make that happen. So the crane truck that we'd want to buy would be big enough to lift up our biggest pumps on a regular basis. So hopefully the information that you have and our discussion is enough to make you comfortable with those purchases. Obviously, we're going to do whatever you fund and whatever you tell us to do. We'll keep limping along if you don't want to buy a vac truck or a crane truck, but I'm comfortable with the financing and the use and the justification for it. They're tools that we use regularly, often, and not luxuries.
Okay. If I may, I want to bifurcate this discussion with the council. And what I mean by that is I'd like to talk about just a crane truck first. I think the recommendation, from what I understand, is that we purchase it outright out of the enterprise fund, and there's ample fund balance there from what I understand. And I wanted to go around just before we get into discussion to see kind of preliminary where everyone's at with that. You okay?
I agree. Just the crane truck outright.
Okay. Okay, I do as well.
I do as well.
I do as well.
Okay, so can we just, by consensus, budget that item?
Yes, we'll add it into the budget.
Okay. And then the next item up for discussion, it's my understanding the recommendation is that that item's amortized over the period of 7 years. That's around $70,000, and that's going to come out of our utilities fund as well.
Correct, and the interest rate on that was 2.85%.
Okay. And we have ample funds not only this year, but we should in the future. Is that your
Yes.
analysis of this?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to start just by consensus to see where everyone's at, and then if there's any divide, then we'll have some discussion.
No, I agree.
Okay.
Was there any inquiry as to a used vac truck, or just nothing available? I know used equipment is quite hard to come by right now, so.
In my conversation with staff, we have looked at that and over a period of time have looked into that. Their sense is that by the time a vac truck comes on the market, it's about 95% used up. So there are vac trucks out there, but our understanding is that most of the value of those is gone by the time they come on the market. The U.S. waters of the world use them up.
I do appreciate the analysis that was done as to the rent versus reuse. I think that very clearly establishes the case for a purchase of the vehicle as opposed to trying to rent one or keep one keep the existing one going. So I am in support of purchasing the new truck.
Okay, I'm in support of purchasing, and I agree with the method of purchase as well. So I'm on board with both of those items. Councilman, sir? Okay.
I am too. Once you look at the numbers, I mean, it's $11,000 a month rent
Yes.
and almost 2 years of payments to repair what we had. So it makes sense to go ahead.
Well, and again, I know we had kind of conversations without enough information. What I've discovered over the last week, and kudos to Sal and Richie and Rachel for putting this information together for us. It's virtually impossible to rent a truck for 3 hours or 6 hours or whatever time we might need it. They want a week. And, you know, after 8 hours of pumping, we're done and we'd want to send it back. So it's not like renting a trailer or renting a lawnmower. They want a fairly substantial commitment to make that happen.
I do have a quick question. While you all were doing the research, was there any service plans looked into to be included?
At the time that we bring this, at the time that we bring the Vector for approval for purchase, we'll have service plans available. The truck that we've already researched does have it, but then that item, when we actually say, okay, it was approved in a plan, but now we want to purchase it, that's going to also come before council regardless. So then at that time, and we'll also look into if there's any used trucks that could be comparable to a new one at that time. We'll reach out to the vendors that are selling the trucks, and we'll get a couple prices for used ones, if any are available at the time when we present it to council.
And just for the record, on my way here, I got stuck behind that Vector truck, and I don't think it was able to get out of its own way. So I saw there is a need.
And for the record, they broke the water main in front of my, just so they could prove they needed the vac truck.
Okay. So by consensus, we have a vac truck, which we agreed on, at least for budget, and then it'll be brought back to us. And we've also, at this point, agreed on the method of payment, correct?
Yeah, we're going to be
Okay.
leasing it.
Okay. I just want to make sure we have both items. So by consensus, can we budget that?
Yes, we will.
Thank you. Are there any other items that need to be talked about as it relates to the utilities?
Are we reviewing this capital improvement plan on the utilities, or is that?
No, I think that's a discussion for another day. I only wanted to know whether or not we're going to budget someone to come in and give us an expert evaluation or opinion, and then I think that should be put on a council discussion for later. But I think that we need some probably point in the right direction by an expert before we make decisions on how we're going to go with the CIP plan.
Okay.
That's just my opinion. I'm not trying to tell you guys.
And I also want to, I don't know if you guys have been asked, but a couple of people said to me about leasing. I tried to tell them that we're not leasing, we're financing. So we might want to use the term financing in lieu of leasing, because they're like, why are you leasing a truck? So.
Okay. Any other issues as it relates to this fund? Yes.
You buy it out for $1.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a lease purchase.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's call it rent home.
Sure.
Or financing.
But you can all the lawyer work.
So the Stormwater Fund is separate, but kind of in the same general area. Can we
Right.
discuss that next?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So stormwater, at the end of FY20, we had $144,000 in fund balance.
Where are you?
Page numbers.
Yeah, where are we?
I just have a fund balance spreadsheet. This is from actually our last budget presentation. This is from that PowerPoint that I did.
All right. First one to call out the number, let me know.
The first to find it has to say bingo and then call out a page number. The other option is if we can get a copy of that, that may be the best to work off of.
Yes.
If that was in our last packet. can we
It's in
just
your
have-
last packet.
Can we
Yep,
have a
it's from
copy of
the
that?
PowerPoint. Yeah, right now?
Yes, please,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Up, it's page 133. Well, it starts, that's one of the pages.
That's one. Stormwater 131.
Stormwater on 55.
127. Fine, leave it to him. Well, 127 has a zero balance, so that doesn't count. We're actually 128.
This is from the PowerPoint. That's not it. He's making copies.
Are you going to be going through these off the PowerPoint presentation? On the other?
Yes, it's from the other PowerPoint.
I wonder if we should make copies of all.
Oh, it's just one PowerPoint page that shows all the fund balances. It's just one page.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I gotta make copies.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. All right, move that back. Now I've got this right here now. Okay, so we're on stormwater unassigned, which is the bottom line of the
Yep.
fund balance.
Yeah, Fund 410 is stormwater. So like I said, FY20 ending fund balance was about $144,000. Originally, I was estimating a huge loss of $90,000, but I went through the expenses in that fund and I noticed that there were some things that should have been charged to like public works. There were trees that were taken down that weren't specific to stormwater. They were just two big trees that were removed. So I reclassed those to public works. Things like that. There were the Caterpillar, like the front loader and things like that. They had large maintenance repairs that were about $9,000 worth, and that was also charged to Stormwater Fund. And I felt like that was more of a public works related expense, so I took that out as well. So I estimate about $55,000 deficit coming from that. So it'd be about $90,000 left in that fund balance at the end of the year. So obviously that percentage is a little bit higher, maybe about 21%.
Let me ask you this question. One of the things that you've done very well is you've gone back in prior years and you've looked at the balances. Is this balance, is it growing or shrinking over time?
It's shrinking. Just to give you an idea, so in FY18, about $78,000 was taken out of fund balance to pay for all the expenses. So every year, you're continually chipping away at the fund balance. So that's why a rate study really needs to be done, because we're not bringing in enough revenue to cover the expenses.
Let me ask you this, I guess budget-wise, are there any concerns about getting through this year without having enough in the fund balance to make it through until the study's done?
We are looking at appropriating in that budget a little over $300,000, and as it stands now, we make about $126,000 in revenue off of that fund. So there's no way that you could cover current expenses in the next year's budget.
Will we make it through this year's budget with?
Yes, like I showed, you would still have a fund balance left over.
So
But
that
it would not be enough to cover next year's deficit.
So the 54,000 is what we would have projected left over at the end of the year?
Yeah, it
90,000.
would actually be
okay.
about $90,000 after I went
Okay.
through and looked at all the expenses in that fund.
Understood, okay. But that 90,000, if we don't address the stormwater, won't survive the next year, there'll be a
Correct,
deficit?
it will not be enough to cover next year's loss.
Okay, understood. Any questions or comments from the council? The only question that I had is is there any way to address what we charge for stormwater short of a stormwater study? In other words, is that something we can set as a city, or does a study have to be done? Does anyone know the answer?
Set whatever we want, I believe.
Yeah, I
but
think-
the stormwater study just provides the backup to support whatever we set this rate to.
Okay.
We can just run analysis between county and New Orleans and everybody else and set that rate.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to figure out, if we have to do a study or.
You don't have to do a study to set a rate.
So the question is,
I wouldn't do it because you have no backup to support it, but.
okay. The question is, can we change the rate in the middle of the budget season, or do we have to wait till next year's budget to actually change that? In other words, because I would prefer not to lose money this year if we don't have to.
I believe you can implement a new rate at any point in time, once you have the backup.
Okay.
I mean, once the study's complete, then you can reset the rate and you have the substantiation to support whatever rate goes through.
Okay. So in other words, if we do a study and it comes through in January or February with recommendations, at that point we can address it?
Yes.
Okay.
Or not until the next, or until next budget season. I mean,
Understood.
It's
No,
our
I'm just
discussion.
I'm just concerned that that's a low fund balance and it's not getting any better, so
Yeah, we would be in dire need if we don't address it.
correct. Okay. That's all I had on that particular issue, unless someone else had any questions. Okay.
Mr.
Well-
Mayor.
When we're done with the entire, I'll give you your three. You know, I want to get through everything so you can speak to everything at once, if that's okay. If you want to use your 3 minutes here, you're welcome to do it. Welcome, Mr. Mueller. Come on up. Okay. So does that conclude the not just the stormwater, but the utilities and the enterprise fund?
Yes.
Okay. Where would you like to go to next?
We can look at the general fund if you'd like.
Okay. Can you give us just an overview of the general fund?
Yes, so so the same fund balance sheet that we just provided. If you look at general fund, the FY20 ending fund balance was $1,024,000. We're estimating $300,000 to bring forward. So that's about $1.3 million in fund balance. And that equates to about 21% of the budget, of the new budget, the FY22 budget. So I reached out to the auditors to find out about fund balance, what typically we should have in there for reserves, and they estimated between 25 and 30% of your appropriations for the entire fund. So that would look like $1.5 to $1.8 million. So we're currently a little short on that.
Any discussion on the fund balance at this point?
I have questions on the revenues and the expenditures. Do we want to go through that individually, or how do we want to?
Yeah, because I want to go through that as well, and I want to circle back around to the fund balance in terms of what we have in reserves, but I want to talk about that as part of another issue, because I think some of them run hand in hand. And what I guess the question that I'm going to have is whether or not some items that may be in our general fund that we pay for may be reimbursable under ARPA. And the question that I have is, does that money just go back into our reserves?
Yes, it would.
Okay. So if, for example, either fire or police, we want to use overtime, and that's COVID related, we can then utilize the ARPA funds to reimburse our general fund.
Yes, so you would spend it out of the general fund, and the ARPA money would go to reimburse that money.
Okay, understood. And at this time, would you, because I don't want to go through the whole budget line item through line item, we should probably highlight some of the issues that we want to talk about and have her give us the factual information about those individual items, and then we can talk about you know, where we want to go with that.
Okay.
So, Mr. McCleary, I was going to let you bring up any issues that you have.
In the revenue for the general fund. Oh, sure. Page 50. in the revenue section of the general fund, you're showing a 40% increase in red light tickets, whereas we were tracking obviously 40% less throughout historical. What's the justification for that 40% increase in revenue?
Yeah, so it was not properly budgeted for last year. They only estimated about $1 million, but if you look at current year through August 31st, we're about 1.3 million already. So it was just under budgeted. So I'm trying to budget for it more appropriately.
So the 1.4 million is what we didn't budget last year, but is what we're actually getting.
Exactly.
In, that's the utility fund. That's stormwater fund. I went backwards the other way with it, so that's where I apologize. In the general administration fund, page 65, under dispatchers, we have a 140% increase in the dispatch salary. Is that a reallocation, or is that a, it looked like it was a transfer from the CRA. But.
Yes, I do remember that the salaries were inappropriately budgeted. I want to say actually it was 50% to the enterprise fund, to the utility fund. So we brought that back to the general fund because we didn't really see the need as to why utility fund should be paying 50% of dispatcher salary.
Okay. In the, I'm sorry, page 68, we have building department, regular salary and wages up 340%.
Yes. So what happened was we have 4 captains, fire captains, that also are inspectors as well. So we budgeted about 10 to 15% of their time would be on inspections. So we budgeted their salaries to the building department accordingly.
So they're covering.
Coming off the fire.
They're coming off the fire.
Correct.
We're reallocating from fire to building.
Yes, for that time that's spent on inspections to show what the actual purpose of that job is.
And then we have a 300% increase in professional services.
Yes, and that's because we don't have a building inspector currently. So the rates are extremely high to bill out for it.
Okay.
Are those services that we still contract with?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we know what the total estimated cost is if we continue with Nova throughout the year?
We budgeted for about $90,000. We're hoping that at some point we can work with another municipality potentially to utilize their building inspector.
Okay. Because that's about what the salary, I think, historically has been in the past, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's,
Okay. Okay.
and I know that position is still listed on Newport's job site, city manager there, and I have a verbal agreement to split that position once that person is selected. And the salary is consistent with what we've budgeted for the entire expenditure. So assuming that all works, they find somebody, we're able to work out a 2 days here, 3 days there agreement, that number should come down by 30-40%.
That's all I have.
As we're moving forward on those pages, on page 85, maybe I'm jumping, Community Redevelopment Fund, the demolitions.
Yes. So,
Okay, just for the record, by charter, we have to have a building administrator, and it's my understanding that's what that position from Nova, the contract is filled.
Yes.
Okay.
You can't operate without that. You keep saying building inspector, that's something
He's a
Oh.
building official.
sorry, building official.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify that for the record. And I didn't hear what you had asked, Mr. Kinsella. I'm really
On
sorry.
page 85, the Community Redevelopment Fund, Building Department demolitions,
Yes. so-
150,000.
Yeah, so the building department, that's for blight and things like that. They need to demolish a property.
Because Seaside may be one of those properties coming up so it's going to be a big property to demolish.
But that's not a city cost.
Yes, it is.
Why would we be demolishing Seaside?
Well, let's just say generically and hypothetically, What, in this current budget year, we've got $10,000 budgeted for demolition. If we're gonna go out and do code inspection, identify blight, and eventually determine a building needs to come down, what we have budgeted this year is enough to take down one house. My assumption is that we want to do more of that than just one house. And to do that, we have to have the funds available. Now, obviously, at some point in the future, those funds theoretically come back to us if the lot sells, if we've put a lien on the property. But to actually hire a contractor, if I'm going to tell the building official and the code enforcement personnel to go out and do code enforcement, and at the point that you determine a structure meets the qualifications for demolition, we have to have the funds appropriated to actually pay for demolition. And $10,000 a year isn't anywhere near what I think we need to be doing. I think there's 10 or 15 properties in the city that will qualify for demolition. So that's why that number is dramatically higher. I'm anticipating that with our code enforcement, we're going to find more properties that, if it's minor stuff, people fix them up and they're off of our list. But there are properties that are not going to be fixed. They need to come down. And once we get through the process, I have to be able to pay a contractor, a demolition contractor, to go out and tear down the building. So I'm anticipating 10 to 15 structures in the next year. If it's a larger structure, it'll cost us more. But I want to have adequate funding when I tell code enforcement, go out and enforce the code. If the structure doesn't get fixed up, then ultimately I have to pay to tear it down. So that's why that number is dramatically bigger. I'm anticipating the possibility of tearing down more houses.
I'm assuming these are carry forward costs, though. We would be issuing tax liens against the costs
Absolutely.
incurred.
Yes.
Right.
But also
So,
think that accumulates interest as well.
Yeah.
so
And-
you're generating the cash revenue in order to execute the work that we will then be refunded.
Correct.
Okay.
Assuming the property sells for enough to cover the lien, but
I don't think that's much of an issue at this point.
But that is, yeah, and it may be a year or two or three that money comes back to us, but when the contractor's done tearing it down, he wants to get paid.
And just to clarify for the record, we crossed over into a CRA item.
Blame him, because I had
Correct.
some other stuff too.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll just follow the pages.
No, that's okay. So, before we get back to the CRA general fund, one of the things I wanted to ask is, it's my understanding this budget was kind of mirrored, or last year's budget was kind of difficult to follow just the way it was done. So this was mirrored from the 19 budget, correct?
Yes, correct.
And back then, the millage rate was hovering right around 5.7 mils,
5.78.
5.78.
Yeah.
What's the substantial difference between that 5.78 millage rate and then it looks like we have a 6.5 millage rate, so it looks like there was a substantial increase?
Yes, so it's actually about $200,000 more outside of that. So it's 5.6, and if you're looking at strictly at that and not contingency or any other items, it's 5.6 versus 5.8 this year. So that additional money is $400,000 in contingency, and then the 3 additional firefighters that we included in there.
Okay. So the 3 additional firefighters takes us from, if that's the direction the city goes, from 5.7,
From about 5.8 to
5.8 up to
6.4.
6.5?
Yes, 6.4.
Okay.
6.4.
What I wanted to do at this point is on that issue, because that's the major change it looks like in what our ad valorem taxes would be from the 2019 year to where we're at now, is I wanted some recommendations from our city manager as to the fire department and the analysis between the need and the cost for 3 additional full-time firefighters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of things. One, it's important to remember that Port Richey is a first response entity. Within our district, we are the first responders. We are not the only responders. Virtually every call we run will be accompanied either by an EMS unit, by a New Port Richey fire unit, or a Pasco County fire unit. Chief and I have spent, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 hours wrestling with this. Ideally, you know, in the hypothetical world where money is no object, it's easy. In, you know, at the other end of the scale, do nothing, leave it where it is, and your millage rate, you know, is much more attractive. Personally, I think an incremental approach is advantageous, and by that I mean if we add one full-time fire position this year, reevaluate next year. If it looks like it would be advantageous to add another one, come back and make the same presentation next year. Now, for the record, Chief and I don't agree about that. And he and I have wrestled with this a lot. But he is absolutely committed to looking out for the fire department, doing what's best for the fire department. And I appreciate that. I have to look out not only for the fire department, but public works and water and sewer and so on, and for the mill levy. And so he and I will continue to wrestle with that and wrestle with the outcomes. But my recommendation would be a middle ground between where we are now and what I know Chief wants and what was presented in our last meeting. I think with one full-time position coming on, that still leaves a burden on the chief to use part-time and volunteer folks to fill those other 2 shifts. You know, his life gets a whole lot easier if we add 3 positions. The challenge for us at the next level, you and I, is that that burns up a whole bunch of millage rate. And by burn it up, I mean politically. There's a limit to how much we all can stand paying the property taxes. And so I would advocate for a middle position. Obviously, if you want to fund 3 full-time firefighters, the chief's going to put them to work. If you wanted to fund 0, we'll keep doing what we're doing now. But I think funding 1 gives us some flexibility. It doesn't tie our hands financially, brings the mill levy down more than it is now, and keeps some of those other priorities in place that you all have talked about, contingencies, reserves, and doing some of the other projects that we want to do. So that would be my recommendation. Now, obviously, the 5 of you are going to tell Chief and I what you want, and that's the fire department that we'll put on the field. But I think there's a middle ground that gives us some flexibility, gives us an opportunity to grow a little more gradually. And personally, I'm not opposed to that. I think there's plenty of work for 3 more FTEs. But I think there's a fiscal and a political balance to be made here. So, like I said, I'll do what you fund. And if you fund 1, I'll say thank you. And if you fund 3, Chief and I will both say thank you. But that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. This is one that I wanted to comment on because it's really the biggest line item that really changes our mill levy from where we were back at 5.8 up to 6.5, which is substantial for a city our size, and not just because of what it does to our budget this year, but it's what it does to our budget next year and the year after and the year after, because obviously when you add full-time positions, they're not going to go down in price. They're going to go up in terms of insurance, what they make, raises, so on and so forth. One of the things that I did a lot of research on this issue because I wanted to look at it. I looked at the Florida League of Cities and I looked at the National and International League of Cities, and they had kind of some formulas that should be used in terms of looking to see how many firefighters per capita you should have in your city and what your tax base would support. The formula that they used was 1.52 firefighters per 1,000 people in your city, and that's what your tax base should support. Which in our city, around 3,000 people, would be around 4.5 firefighters. When I would read about that, a lot of smaller cities, what they do is they use their 3 or 4 full-time firefighters, and they utilize either part-time or volunteers to fill in the gaps. I certainly don't like that, and I think we can afford to do better for our citizens. I guess where I'm going with this, I also went through all the different logs that they have for the last few months to see how many we're on. One of the things that one full-time person would add is a swing shift. So you would have some shifts that would have 3 full-time employees that are all city employees. But it also allows, if someone calls out sick or goes on vacation, you always have coverage for those particular shifts that are full-time. So I think one actually saves us money because you're not paying overtime, so on and so forth. But I still think we can get to 3 firefighters per shift. But what I was thinking that we may be able to do, because some of the other blogs that I read as it pertains to Florida League of Cities and the Firefighters Association, is the need for firefighters has gone up with COVID. We have ARPA money coming in, but ARPA is kind of interesting because it doesn't really seem to cover, from what I was reading, the full-time firefighters. Those are kind of permanent positions, but I think more likely to cover part-time positions, which is reimbursable back into our general fund, which would help with reserves, which is the circle I'm going. What I would like to do is budget for 1 full-time and then have another additional amount of money that can be utilized for part-timers to fill in when our chief wants 3 people on a shift. On a busy Friday, a busy Saturday, a busy Sunday, I think our chief knows when our bid peak times are. We'll have 3, whether it's a swing person or whether we can put a part-time. If there's slower times and he wants to or feels comfortable with 2, that's fine as well. But that's where I would like. I think if we do that, that would move the millage rate somewhere between 6 and 6.1. The reason I wanted to do that as well is because looking at other needs of the city, we have other items that are coming down the pike that are going to come out of our general fund. I'll give an example. We have road construction projects. We probably have about $250,000 worth of road construction projects that are going to have to come out of general fund in the next few years. If we set the millage rate at 6.5, next year want to do a road construction project, that means we're moving the millage rate from 6.5 to 7, 7.5, so on and so forth. And I think that's too much for our tax base. So I'm really advocating for lower taxes, but I still want to do the best I can to accommodate the fire department's needs. And I think that adding the 1 firefighter always gives them at least 2 full-time people and sometimes 3 just with full-time folks, and then some additional part-timers as well, which will cover those other shifts. So that's the direction I'd like to go with this. I think it'll help with the millage rate, but it also will help with reserves because I think some of the part-timers will be reimbursed from ARPA, which will just go back into reserves for our general fund, which will help that particular issue since we're already low. But it also leaves us a little room if we want to budget. For example, I know there was a Clark Moody Road, and I think that's going to be about $60,000 to fix. If we want to repave that, we have enough room to do that. We're not bound just with firefighter salaries. So that's the direction that I was recommending. And I think that we can meet the needs of the public with that and still pretty much for the most part have 3 people on a truck most times, if not all times.
One thing that we did talk about at the last meeting, we did have a vote, and I think it was a 4-to-1 vote for adding this into the budget. So this is going to be a long process if we keep revisiting 4-to-1 votes on certain things. Now maybe everybody's opinion's changed since then. I'm not sure. I know how it is to work with volunteers and part-time people. Very difficult to schedule. People don't show up and things like that. So I'm still for keeping this in the budget.
I'm definitely for keeping it in the budget. I've been doing some research of my own, different from the way that you're doing it, because you're doing it from a bean counter point of view, and I'm doing it from a safety point of view and a personnel point of view. Our firefighters are already understaffed on their trucks, according to the OSHA and the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association, which adopted a 2-in and 2-out policy for the safety of firefighters and rescue efforts that are made by our firefighters when they attend a fire. If our guys are going in there with only 2 people on a truck, that means that one of them is going to have to take the chance of going in and rescuing your wife or your child or your grandmother or your mother, because they're supposed to have 2 go in at a time. They can't leave the truck sitting out there abandoned the whole time. Somebody is supposed to be doing something else. I mean, you know, when you have 2 firefighters outside, they can at least be attending, trying to get some water on that fire. Their purposes, from what I was reading, is rescue, work of ventilation, and application of water to extinguish a fire. If you can't rescue those people because you don't have enough people on that truck, you're already tying their hands. They can't ventilate the area because there are not 2 guys in there chopping a hole in the roof so that they can ventilate it, and there's nobody outside to operate the water. So our trucks are already understaffed by OSHA and the NFPA standards that I've been reading about since this whole time. So I'm staying with 3.
And can I comment just on that?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have 2 or 3 on a truck, I think that the normal procedure or protocol is we go out and set up. Whether you have 2 or 3, they set up the hose. There's always 1 man on the pump, and you have 2 men with gear ready to go in. But whether you have 2 or 3 on a truck, I don't think anybody's going in until the second truck goes there.
If you're in there and your mother is in there and that house is on fire, it only takes 10 minutes for that house to go up. I watched one across the street from me. It takes no time at all for that house to fill up with smoke. I want them in there taking care of my mother, my children, my husband, whatever else human being is in that house. I want them to go in and rescue them and get them out before they burn up.
No.
I can't imagine being in a house, seeing firefighters outside of it, struggling to breathe, watching the fire creep up on me, and then not come in because they don't have enough people to come in and get me out.
But I don't think that's going to change whether you put 2 or 3 people on a truck. I think you need 5 to go into a house.
You really, truly do, but we can't afford 5 for sure. There's no doubt about it. So why are we still shorting this? We exist as a city to protect our people, to give them the benefits of the utilities that we have, the water, the sewer, the fire, and the police department. If my house is not safe from fire or safe from robbery or anything else like that, you guys aren't doing me any good if my people are understaffed. I mean, I think they're understaffed. They're stressed out. I've been in situations where there was not enough people to take care of a situation. You have to sit and wait for them. In the meantime, somebody could be dying. And that really bothers me, that the bureaucrats and the legislators of this period of time are ready to cut the budget where it really means a life-saving procedure. I'd rather cut the budget on Clark Road, even though we can patch that sucker again all we want to. But nobody's going to die in a pothole, I hope, unless it turns into a sinkhole. That can be a whole different thing. But I would much rather cover my fire department and my police department with the equipment. We've got the equipment, we're getting the cars, we're getting these guys trained, we're getting them up to a certain standard, we're getting them certified, we're getting it so that people don't look at their Port Richey column on their resume and say, oh, well, they just didn't do anything down there. These guys are getting up there where they're worth a lot of money to us, and they can save our lives. I support the fire department and the police department 100%. I'd rather cut grass cutting.
Oh, no, I agree that we support all those departments, but what I'm trying to figure out is procedurally.
I'm trying to do it from a bean counter point of view. And I understand what you're trying to do, and I admire what you're trying to do as far as fixing the budget, but I just can't sit there and say, let's take away from the fire department and the police department when we need those people. Because emergencies don't schedule. They don't go through busy times. They happen when you least expect it. Your house is broken into, you're assaulted on the street, something goes wrong in the electrical. Some of these houses are 50, 60 years old, especially our single level houses that have not been rebuilt. We have fire problems. In fact, when I bought my house 8 years ago and I discovered the electrical mess that was in my attic, I was surprised that house hadn't burned to the ground. I had 220 lines, 2 of them in my attic going nowhere. And I'm really surprised that it didn't burn down. But I'm just saying, I support the fire and the police department department before I would do anything else. So that's where I stand on it.
Okay. Mr. McClary?
Chief, in the case there was a house fire, what would be the response? Would you be waiting for Newport Richey or Pasco County or some other responder to come, or how would that, walk me through that?
What happens is we get the call. Our dispatch tones it out. We respond with our two guys, me if I happen to be there, if it's during the times that I'm there, and then we call for backup. The problem that we have is the two backup trucks we have, or the two backup areas we have, are the busiest in the county. So the city of Newport Richey is running 18 to 22, 25 calls a day. If you take each call's 30, 45 minutes, that means 18, 16 hours a day they're not available. Engine 11 is Embassy, which is the busiest. It's probably 11th busiest in the nation. That's our county first due backup truck. It's running by itself, again, 20-something calls a day. A matter of fact, we back them up because they're so busy all the time. We wind up backing them up on calls. So those are our two immediate backup trucks. After that comes Little and Mass, which is probably the 4th busiest in the county, and then River Ridge. That one's probably a little more available, but it's coming from River Ridge right by the school there. And then Hudson, which is another very busy fire truck. So that's our problem is, yes, outside resources are coming. We have to. We can't run a house fire by ourselves with two guys, so that mutual aid request is going in. But the problem is, when are they going to get there? We don't have that answer. We never have that answer until they show up. You know what I mean? It's call dependent. Like Ms. Sorella said, there's no way to dictate when the calls are going to be. We don't have peak times and non-peak times. So that's the problem that we have.
So my house catches on fire, I'm up on the 2nd floor, and the fire's coming. You get the call, you put in the call for backup,
Yep.
Presumably engine 42 shows up.
Those two guys would show
Those two
up.
fine gentlemen
Yep.
right there show up.
Those two guys would show up, and the driver, which is in the hat on the right, he would be in non-gear. He'd be in clothing because he's driving the fire truck, and it's not safe to mandate that they drive in bunker gear. So the captain would be geared up. He'd show up in full gear. The driver has to get out of the truck, put all of his gear on, while the captain would walk around your house, try to figure out, shut the power off, what kind of hazards are associated, where the fire may be, top floor to the right, back corner, front corner, whatever it may be. As he meets around the front, then he has to go to the truck, he has to pull the line off, and then by then, hopefully the driver has got his gear on, he can charge the line, they gotta get forcible entry tools, go over and force the door and go in, if there's a victim there. If there's
So
no
they would
victim,
go in with or without backup?
by law, they're not allowed to go in unless there's two people outside. The only time by law they would allow to go inside to try to rescue somebody is if both of those guys are geared up, ready to go, and you had two people that were on the scene geared up outside. The third firefighter would allow this whole process to take place. Two of them would show up in gear, ready to go. And the driver would get out, pull a line for them, take care of driver stuff while they're getting tools to the door, while they're assessing, shutting off power, turning off the propane, doing whatever. The two of them could go in. With me showing up, that allows us 2 in, 2 out. The federal law states that an incident commander or a pump operator will count as outside people as long as they're not committed to something major, meaning that he can't be committed to a patient, or I couldn't be committed to a burn patient outside and then still count for 2 in, 2 out.
So the third person on the crew feasibly allows for our single engine to respond to a house fire and save somebody's life.
Yes.
I noticed that there's 2 people here. I'm assuming they're both full-time?
Yes. No, he's part-time.
He's part-time?
John Thiel Underwrite is part-time.
How many people are on shift right now?
2.
So
And
not
me
3,
here.
only, well, you
Yeah.
here, but
Yeah.
not 3, 2.
2. There's never 3. The only time you'll ever see 3 people on that fire truck is if it's a trainee, meaning that we hired you and you have to spend a couple of shifts to be checked off by the captains to function. So when you're in training, you're as an extra on the truck for those 3 days. If it's questionable, we may go 4 or 5 days with you. If you're an ace in the hole, at the end of the 3 days, you're good to go. And then sometimes we may have a volunteer that rides, but out of our list of 15 volunteers, there's only 4 that are hot zone capable. All the rest are just support.
So if we added one full-time firefighter, essentially we would just be adding one full-time firefighter to one shift. And then the other two shifts would probably, or two other time where that guy is not on, would be down to 2 people.
Yep.
That's a hell of a lottery. I would prefer to go with 3 full-time firefighters, and I think we've, not to shortchange you, but we already have 3.
That's okay. I wanted to follow up with his questions, because when I read the OSHA standards, they wanted 5 people on scene to go into a house, 2 in, 2 out, and then 1 on the pump. So even if you have 3, you're never going into that house until another truck gets there, from what I can read and what I can understand.
No. It's 2 in, 2 out, 4 people, minimum.
So who's on the pump then if you got 2 in, 2 out?
Well, if the pump operator is functioning outside, as I'm functioning outside, but we're in standby. God forbid, and I say that because I hope it never happens, but God forbid something happens to them. The captain goes in and the firefighter goes down. Let's forget about civilians, but one of those guys gets hurt.
Correct.
Now, he leaves the pump, I leave the command post, and we're doing everything we can to extract those people from the call.
Correct, then you have no one on the pump. That's like all the...
Sure, but
everything.
that would be the rarity. That would be the God worst case scenario.
Sure.
I would leave that fire truck to save somebody, yes.
No, I
One of my
understand, but
fires.
that's why I was saying, when I read, most fire departments don't go in unless they have 5, from what I could read. That's why I was saying 3 doesn't
They
really
actually
help.
want 15.
What's that?
They actually want 15 on a low hazard, which that's not 2-story, that's not on the water, it's not 3-story. So a low hazard, average house fire, they actually want 15 people on the scene within 7 minutes. If you really want to read the whole,
No, I understand that, but
Yeah.
I guess what I'm getting is putting what our city is in perspective. It's a small city, you know, you have limited resources. Whether you have 2 or 3 on a truck, from what I read, it's still not safe to go 2 in, 2 out until you have another engine on scene.
no, it's the 2 in, 2 out is a federal mandate for us to protect ourselves. And with the third person, that allows us, as the city of Port Richey, to stand on our own 2 feet and meet the minimum standard, which is the 2 in, 2 out. Without that, we can't meet that without outside assistance.
So you don't think there's any liability problems going in 2 in, 2 out with no one on the pump?
There's liability problems in just about everything we do, sir.
That's all I'm saying.
You keep talking about the pump, but we leave the pump right now because we don't have a choice.
No,
So
but-
I would leave the pump in that case because I wouldn't have a choice. It
But
would
if-
be rescue you and leave the pump, or stay with the pump and wait till somebody comes to rescue you. That's the situation that we're at. So we leave the pump currently now because we don't have a choice.
No, I understand, but what I'm getting at is when you have a second, if there's nobody in the house is empty, and you're
Okay.
pretty sure about that, and you're just losing material things,
Okay.
I would presume you don't go 2 in, 2 out with no one on the pump. You wait for a second truck and then you man it appropriately, correct?
We'll protect exposures and do what we got to do to knock the fire down and keep things contained like we do until we get backup resources.
Correct, from the outside. You're not going in with that, I would presume.
No.
Okay. That's what I was getting at. So for the most part, you're not going in, 2 out with just 4 people.
I don't understand the question.
For the most part, if there's nobody in the house, you're not going to go in that
If
house.
my butt's in the house, go in 2 in, 2 out without and then we'll worry about liability later. How's that sound?
No, I understand.
That all
It's a-
depends on the scenario, sir. There's 100 ways to look at it, but yes, that all depends on the scenario.
Chief, my question real quick.
Sir.
Of all the fires that you respond to, how many times have you known there's nobody inside that house?
Very rarely. And even then, we can't. I had one in probably about 4 years ago where the lady was yelling, my kids are inside, my kids are inside. And I got a little suspicious, I don't know why, but she had 50 cat stickers on the back of her car. My babies, that's the word she used. It's 1 in the morning, my babies are inside, and we went inside, and her babies are her cats. Now, my sister's babies are her horses. But I came outside and I probably said things to a civilian I probably shouldn't have said at that particular time, but the fact that myself and 2 other firefighters risked our lives to go inside for what we thought were babies, there turned out to be cats.
But every
So
call
the
you
information-
respond to, you have no clue what's waiting on the other side.
It's-
You never have the clue, so you're going to give 100+%.
Yes.
I feel you were talking about liability just a bit ago. I think we have a greater liability by keeping our fire trucks manned with 2 people. And I think we seriously need to reconsider and go for that third person.
Understood. I still have reservations because I still think that you need mutual aid for certain things, and The only other thing I would point out is no different than if there's an active shooter in Walmart. We don't have a SWAT team. You have mutual aid with the county, and they come out with a SWAT team, and they probably neutralize that situation. I'm not suggesting we should increase the police budget in case that possibility happens. I know the fire department has different issue in terms of that, but in terms of a small city, I think you're always in need of mutual aid. You're never going to be able to grow to where you're going to be able to transport to where you're going to put 4 or 5 people on a truck, is what you should really have. I mean, in terms of fighting fires, you look at the county and some of the other places that have much more resources than we'll ever have as a small city, and they haven't manned most stations with probably 5, 6, 7 people. I just don't see that for a small city. So my concern is, even if you had 3, I just don't know where that changes in terms of if you're still waiting for mutual aid, you're still waiting for backup before you can go in. And I humbly just disagree. I'm for lower taxes, and the fire department's functioned with 2 for years and years, and that's just where I sit. It's from a fiscal position, and and I remember that Mr. McCleary, talking about the truck, said that we had an obligation to our constituents to look at all the different angles and to explore everything in terms of trying to do the best we can for our taxpayers in terms of saving tax money. That was just at the last meeting. So that's why I wanted to look at the different angles and look at this, and I think there's a way to do it where we don't spend as much money, or we take it from other pools of money, which would be ARPA funds. I'm for lower taxes. I don't agree with this, and if I get outvoted on it by consensus or by vote or by motion, I understand, but that's just kind of my position, and I respectfully just dissent on that issue.
We remain 4-1.
Sure.
I mean, that's just the way it is. If we need to find that money somewhere, we can find the money somewhere. Just because we've done it with 2 doesn't mean it's been right. So let's
Let me just say one more thing. Part of our selling point as a city is the response times of our police, of our firefighters, the services we provide to our citizens. They are the most readily visible members of our city staff. They're the ones who drive the big shiny trucks and all that. And that is part of this security and safety that our citizens enjoy, that is well beyond Pasco County. You call Pasco County, I don't know what their response is, but my guess is probably not anywhere near. I know it's not near where our police are, and my guess is it's nowhere near where our fire department is. That is the selling point of the city. Aside from our coastline, aside from our friendly citizen, our friendly office staff, is the emergency personnel response. That's our selling point. We have to support it, even if it costs a little bit.
No, I understand, but I think our response time in a 1 mile radius, 1.5 mile radius, which is a city, whether there's 2 men on the truck or 3 men on the truck, are still going to be vastly superior to the county.
But if they can't go in and they're sitting outside, doesn't do me a hell of a bit of good that they got there in a minute and a half.
I would still question the idea that they would go in with 3 people on duty as opposed to he said 15 would be ideal. But
you said 5, so.
well, 5. No, I got you. But what I read, there's 1 on the pump, 2 in, 2 out, and that's just how it's run, because you always have someone controlling your water supply.
He just told me he'd save my butt, so I'm holding him to it. I didn't. Yeah, I know you're not coming. Yeah.
Okay, so not by consensus, but by 4-1, there's the addition of the line item for the 3 new firefighters, and that's coming out of general fund. And then the only other item I wanted to cover on the general fund, but I don't want to raise taxes, and we're up against it, is we have several roads that need to be done. We have $0 in our line item budget for roads. So I'm open for suggestions. I don't want to raise taxes, but I think we owe it to our constituents to fix roads at some point.
We also need to look at impact fees, the transit fee, the road fees, and things that I think we're sorely low on. Even police and fire are very low on impacts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I mentioned at the last meeting, we need a review of all those impact fees, which will help us also with transportation and roads.
Yes, city staff is working on that.
Thank you.
So I don't think we can use any of the impact fees for old roads for maintenance, only new roads. So that money has to come out of ad valorem taxes, from what I understand.
Yeah,
Yes, you cannot use impact fees on maintenance.
You're not talking about resurfacing a road as maintenance, or is that correct?
That'd be me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you need it.
Well, I, for one, I think we should reevaluate the striping projects or overall capital projects, because we do have some safety issues that are not even being addressed here, or not being addressed for 5 years. If we're talking about safety, I think we may want to reevaluate some of these. But in terms of the road paving, I mean, I understand there are some roads that are in need of it, and I think we definitely should start planning for such. But to say that we need to immediately pave Clark Moody, may be an overstatement of the need.
No, I agree, but there's also a couple of roads that I think are going to be closer to the $200,000 range to repave. And if we don't address it now, where are we going to be in our general fund 2 or 3 years from now? We're going to be in a real bad way. So if you start putting some money aside now, even if it accrues and we do one road every 2 years, I mean, at least it's
Well, it'd
something.
be a line item too, just that alone by itself.
Sure, but then our millage rate is back up to where it is, if not higher.
Everything costs money.
I understand.
All live here, we all pay taxes. We're not just forcing the taxes on everybody. We also live here.
I understand.
Sometimes you need to pay certain things. I was assessed, because I was in the county with some property, and got assessed for a road. I was still paying my county taxes, and I had to pay it on top of it. So, I mean, you're paying either way.
No, I understand. So the issue is whether or not we want to address that now, or just punt it down the road till next year and readdress it.
Well, I don't think it's a bad idea having a line item for these things, which I think would be a good start anyway. As far as kicking the can, I don't think we're actually kicking the can. I think this budget fits our needs at the moment, but we have to have future vision for some of these items, like you're saying. Because I know infrastructure, some of our sewer lines, water lines, and all those things are going to be coming up. So we should start looking at it as line items for each of these items, so we can start making a budgetary fund for each of them, even though maybe 5 years out.
So I just wanted to open that as an issue. If you guys want to address it now and see if we can put something in, that's fine. If not, I'm okay with that. I wanted to just address that. And you're right, we need to look down the road. I 100% agree. One of the concerns I have is we're penny for Pasco, which is really blessed the city in terms of helping with vehicles that would normally come out of ad valorem taxes, police vehicles, fire trucks, etc. But penny for Pasco's out in, I think, 2 or 3 years. So we're going to be purchasing our vehicles out of our ad valorem taxes, so I don't see our tax rate going down. It's just going to continue to climb as we start facing some of these challenges down the road, which is, one of the reasons I'm doing the best I can to keep the taxes down. If we want to say, hey, we want to look down the road at this, I think that as we replace, I think we're on average 2 vehicles a year. I think that penny for Pasco's may not be there 2 or 3 years from now. So.
Well, where do we sit right now? We're probably on 4 points under Newport Richie.
Newport Richie, I have at 8.75. Yeah.
We're 2 points under all still, and we're providing all the services that they are. I don't think they provide anything better to their citizens that we do, and we're at 2 points less. So just let's keep that in mind, that we are providing these services, and we are still under our neighbor in our Avalon.
And I think we're comparable to where Zephyr Hills and some of those are in the same neighborhood.
They don't have full-time positions, I believe, in all their regions, do they? Chief?
Where at Zephyr Hills?
Zephyr Hills and San Antonio and all these different places out there?
The county.
Okay.
Fire department.
So we're a standalone city as far as that goes, and being 2 points under a competitive neighbor, yeah, they're much bigger, but I don't think they're giving their citizenship any greater services that we do, and we're doing it right now at a discount, basically.
I understand. I was just trying to find ways to use ARPA money to offset that. So.
I agree with you.
Oh, I'm sure Mr. Duke can find plenty of ways to spend ARPA money.
No, but if it can be something that helps our general fund, that's where I would like to start. That's all I was saying.
It's all good.
Okay.
We have to keep that in perspective too.
So if we wanted to add a line item to roads, let's say it's going to be 50,000 and we want to put it or somewhere in that neighborhood, what would that do to our millage rate for ad valorem?
So as you can see here, the firefighters for 57,000, it was about 0.26 was the effect on the millage rate. for
So we would be
57.
back up to where we were last year, a little bit higher.
Correct, yes. Or we have $400,000 in contingency, you could reduce that by 50,000.
You
What
have
are-
400,000 in contingency
Is
for,
for emergency purposes. So if there was some sort of natural disaster or something like that.
well,
We dipped into our contingency, a large amount.
That I don't know off the top of my head, I'd have to look into that.
But our reserves are already low. We're at 20%. We should be between 25 and 30. So that's the issue with going that direction.
In our general fund, you're saying?
Yes,
Yeah, we should be 25 to 30, and we're at 21.
correct. So I don't think that's an option. We need to build that as much as we can.
what would bring, what contribution would bring our reserves to 25%?
It was about 200,000.
We have 400,000 in contingency. How often have we drawn down the contingency?
No, 400 from this year going, and we're carrying $1 million now. The 400, I think, is what we're looking to carry
Looking
forward.
at
Yes.
carry forward, yes.
Correct.
How much have we drawn down that contingency? I think you said you weren't aware.
Yeah, I don't know the history.
Well, what
It-
I'm wondering, do we want to, instead of carrying a $400,000 contingency, carrying a $150,000 contingency, assuming we haven't drawn it down, put $200,000 into our reserves for our general fund, and then $50,000 towards road maintenance?
If everybody's comfortable with $150,000 of,
Contingency, but then our reserves are,
give our reserves back up, so.
Well, yeah, but the reason we got there, we didn't pay the CRA into the CRA, which really built our reserves last year.
But this already accounts for paying into the.
yeah,
No,
we
I
are
understand.
already paying. So we're just moving the money. The money's still there. It's what are you labeling it?
Well, you're spending it. You're spending it out of reserves is what you're doing, unless you're going to raise the millage rate.
But you still have the 150,000 contingency. We don't know if 400,000 or 100 is 400,000 a right contingency number. Is 150,000 a right contingency number? We don't know that. But if this natural disaster comes, he still has under emergency declaration the ability to spend down the reserves, which is what we're saving the contingency for. So it's which pot of money are you grabbing in the event of a natural disaster? Knock on wood, we don't have any. It's what are you then spending it out of? And maybe I'm wrong on the accounting portion of it, but the money's still there.
Right.
It's just what are we calling it and what are we spending down on reserves? That way then, at least if we're not calling it contingency and reserving it, it's reserves, that gives him more
Gives us more flexibility there.
cash flow and flexibility to play with. But what do I know? I'm either incredibly right or incredibly wrong right now, so, because everyone's silent or they're just tired.
Well, I think one of the challenges you have to wrestle with, if you budget for 150 in contingency, and you've got a year of $200,000 in problems, that's a challenge for Rachel and I. Whether it's a hurricane or not, a contingency means you've already appropriated it, and as we figure out the unforeseen issues, we can utilize that contingency. If you budget for 150, that's what Rachel and I have to deal with. If you budget for 400, we can handle a lot more problems before we're cashing in
But I think
CDs.
the question is, what kind of problems have you handled in the past with what amount?
Rainy day fund have to be.
Yeah, I mean, if you on last year only used $50,000, that's a whole different equation than, oh, last year we used $350 and we're reserving $4.
So
A problem.
we would need those numbers. What we've done in the last, let's say, 5 years possibly.
Yeah.
What have we budgeted and what have we used?
I mean, look, in the event of a natural disaster, Hurricane Ida or Hurricane whatever comes through, love it or not love it, the federal government's going to come in and start throwing cash around too. So
No, I agree. You know, if something like that happens, we'll have help.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
And we have a grant writer now, so we have possibilities of pulling in some extra cash in some different areas.
Yeah, but I don't know to fix roads necessarily. I think that's always just a.
All kinds of grants out there. It's fun, right?
That's why you hire a grant writer. So high. And I'm expecting big
So you know what's a
So I can tell you, looking at this year's budget, just because of staffing issues, you're about $120,000 into contingency this year
because of staffing
because of
issues.
staffing.
Because we didn't budget for it, we added to staff.
Correct.
All right, so we
Well,
did-
not just because of that, because of the city manager position, you had to go out and search for one. You hired CLA to help with your finances, things
So
of that
all
nature.
that's now
So
within the budget.
It was all emergency related, and it was not budgeted for.
You're
so-
not substantially increasing staff unplanned at this point.
Right, but the expenses that Rachel's talking about, you know, you had 6 months or so where you were paying handsomely for the city manager position. You had a similar period of time where you were paying handsomely for the director of finance position.
Well, that's why neither of you are leaving.
I don't have any plans to leave.
But I'm just pointing
Problem
out.
solved, contingency solved.
But it was, you know, it looked like you budgeted for what it cost for Rachel and for me. But that wasn't your reality for 6 months or a year. And it's those, oh my gosh, now what do we do? You know, it's going to cost double to fill this position or that position. And, you know, I'm not hoping anybody leaves. Everybody stay put. But, you know, a year and a half ago, you weren't expecting to have 2 or 3 important positions leaving either. So that's the flexibility that I was talking about. Things happen, you know, people do leave on occasion, and at least in your very recent history, it cost double for the 6 months what it now costs you for the 2 of us.
I think we need 5 years of data as to what we've drawn down on contingencies to make an educated decision as to what we should carry forward. Yep, and our average amount of contingency that we've held. Because in my world, I love huge contingencies as well. It makes my job incredibly easy. Sometimes we don't have that luxury.
Everybody's like to get a lot of money in the bank.
We've had a couple of really bad years here in Port Richey. You know, our loss of city manager last year, our loss of our police chief, our loss of our building inspector. I mean, we've had tremendous losses in the last couple of years that have cost us because we went outside firm to get a city manager. We had to pay them. That probably would have paid for Clerk Moody. I mean, there's a lot of expenditures that I'm hoping with their change in staff that we would accomplish right now. We keep these guys here and we get set on a better pattern. And then we won't need as much. As far as natural disasters, was Irma the last big one that we had here?
It passed by though, yeah.
Huh?
It passed by, but we had prepped for it.
Yeah, but we had a lot of other things that happened during that time
Sure.
that we had to take care of.
That was the last one we evacuated, if I recall correctly.
Right,
Mhm.
and, you know, we've been lucky so far.
But I'm just real nervous about drawing down on anything. I think that this city's starting to rebound, not only from a mechanical standpoint and being settled in with staff, you know, but I think moving forward, the more that we have in contingencies and/or reserves makes operating this city much more comfortable. So.
It does. I think our biggest problem is we're dealing from years of basic city neglect. Not anybody particular, just vehicles and cars and stuff. There's a lot of things that had to be fixed, and it looks like now this group we're spending money, but we're trying to get us back to where we should be. I think so. Maybe we just have to look at other other ways. Like, I come from a time too, come from the corporate world. We used to get every year, how am I gonna cut my budget every year with my staff and my people? That's what we were presented with. We wanna see a 5% cut in your department for the year. And you had to pull that from who knows where. But, you know, that's something to look at in the future too. There's different money in different places. We gotta go back and review, where's this money really being spent, how it's being spent, and where can we make those little cuts? I don't know if you've had to deal with that, but in management, your department better come up with it at the end of the year.
That's one of my biggest reservations about this city is right now we're somewhat dependent on CRA. And not as much for salaries. I think we've dispersed that issue, but we have no money to do anything without CRA, penny for Pascal, and some of these other pools of money we have. So if you have the employees and their salaries basically set at 6.5 mil levy rate, that means to do anything additional, that tax rate's going to have to go up at some point. And that's my biggest fear. I don't want to do that if we can help it.
Like I just said,
So.
in the corporate world, you were always looked at on how you were going to cut your budget for the year. That's where I came from. They were always asking you, we want a 2% reduction, a 3% reduction in your department this year. And you go around and it's surprising. You can't always make that goal. You'd be surprised what you can find. And I think we have to look in on ourselves a little bit on this and find some of these numbers because, like you said, you don't want to keep raising the millage fee every year to accomplish it. But also, again, I'll go back to, we are still providing the services to the people that our neighbors provide at a 2% discount rate. So I think, in the overall, I think we're doing quite well in that department. So I think a little inner reflection, maybe on the next budget, and start line iteming some of these big projects, the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, the roads, and start putting that stuff together. But,
Well, I think you're right. We've neglected the utilities too. I mean, look at the vehicles and such. So that'll all be reevaluated.
03 or something?
05.
05. Right there, for example.
Right.
05. I mean, that's something I would think would be done every 3 or 4 years. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with neglect from cop cars to fire trucks to vac trucks. We've had a lot of issues. So you're going to have to bite the bullet at one time to get us back up to standards, so to speak. And then we need to start reflecting on ourselves on where we can do a better job. That's all I've got to say.
So in terms of because we were in the area for the general fund at this point, does that kind of close out discussion on the general fund? Does anyone have any other line items they want to touch on or talk about?
Not for general fund.
Okay. And the only other comment I wanted to make, if I vote against the budget overall this year, it's only because of the one line item, and I would prefer to set the millage rate at 5.8, which is where we had it, as opposed to have the 3 additional firefighters. So if I vote against the budget, that's why. It's just that only one line item. So I just wanted to clarify for why I would vote against that. That having been said, we still haven't talked about our CRA yet, or we touched on it, but I wanted to see if we can get a fund balance and then talk about some of the money that we already have earmarked and where we're at with that, if we can.
Yes. So CRA FY20 fund balance was about 1.648. Estimating some balance carry forward. This number is a little bit off because this is before we had purchased those properties. So I would estimate maybe about $2 million in the fund balance, maybe a little bit less. And so that's what I have for the CRA.
And out of that, do you know what we have earmarked? I know that, like, for example, we have the 633, I think, earmarked for the Restore Act. That's already in the process, but I think it's sitting there just waiting to come out of our CRA. Do we know what we have earmarked already out of that 2.2 million?
Specifically grant related, I don't know at this time, no.
Okay.
So we have a $2 million fund balance, but we don't know what we have assigned to that.
Well, we have the expenditures in this budget, but I'm saying as far as the grants are related, perhaps John can give you more information on
Okay,
that, but I don't
I'm
have.
sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
So we have committed a couple $100,000 in the Coatee River Landing area. We have an ongoing grant program that provides funds for people who fix up their homes in a way that's consistent with the grant guidelines. So, you know, you've got some commitments there, but you've also, you know, still got a good deal of cash there to consider what you want done, how you want that directed.
How much of that money that we put there for home improvements for people, how much is that being used?
$4,000, I believe.
Not much.
And it was 50,000 we set aside?
Yes, there's $46,000 outstanding. Actually, I don't know if this is the proper place to talk about that or not.
Yeah, it's CRA, so we're right there.
You can talk,
It's in the budget, yeah.
Do we want, right now it's restricted solely to homeowners. Do we want to possibly expand it to small businesses so they can fix up their, the exterior of their homes or homes, exterior of their businesses to make Port Richey more beautiful, especially along 19 or something along those lines?
It might be something to consider. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea, but
I'd be for that, because whether you cure blight on a house or a business, it's the same, so.
It looks good no
So,
matter what, so.
Yeah, correct.
maybe we should revisit that and add commercial properties to that as well.
Unless there's any legal reason we can't, but, you know, I don't know if there's any restrictions.
Right? Part of it.
Yeah,
was,
it's matching.
Only part of it, though, right? If some people qualified, it was non-matching, and then, or did we switch it over?
I think it was income-based.
Originally,
Yeah.
It was. I mean, for businesses, it would be matching though.
Matching fund, I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Matching funds for businesses.
especially for code compliance and things like that, I would think.
So that's the 200 that you had, the 50.
What?
So I was just trying to get a calculation of the numbers so far to what we had for the,
Cody River lighting and stuff.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
50 for the housing,
and we had 633, which is a Restore Act, which was predates.
all of it.
Correct. So I wanted to put that down because that's already,
But that's a transfer, because that's gonna come back in again. We just need to maintain the cash flow for it.
well, we hope it comes back in.
Technically, it's matching.
So,
Technically, yes.
one of the other things that I had brought up in just general comments in one of our CRA meetings probably a few months ago was to put some money aside, like $100,000, and you could try and put about 25 grand into each quadrant of the city. And I'm talking about, you know, curbs. There's some medians coming into, like for Candlelight, there's a median coming in, and it just looks terrible. And it wouldn't take a lot of money to fix that up and make that median coming into their neighborhood really nice. There's like a palm tree that needs some maintenance. There's the curbs not been painted, it's chipped up. There's weeds growing out of the median. Little things like that's just an example, but I wanted to know if we could earmark about $100,000 for residential improvements, and that includes, there's, I think in front of, I'm trying to think of the road. There's a sidewalk that's over right off of Old Post Road, the first road to the left. It's Quest, I think. And the sidewalk's all broken, and then it's just discontinued halfway through. Those are the types of things that I think we should use some of our CRA money for our residents. I had a guy that was saying that he walked a family member in a wheelchair, and they can't ever go down that way because the sidewalk's broken. That's just an example of some of the things that I've run into. But I would like to just budget $100,000 just for some residential areas, and then throughout the year we can talk about how we want to distribute that money just for our residents.
If there was one pet project that I have is along Grand, where we have everyone walking on the streets in front of all of our businesses right now. I think that's a safety issue and a blight issue in that you have people literally walking on the street in the dark. Doesn't look good.
No, I know what you're talking about, and it's quasi-residential and business. So, you know, I think sidewalks and lighting would be fine there, but I think that we should budget some money aside for some of these projects.
I am
I agree.
100% on board for that.
Same safety problems we have on the Cody River Landing we have now with the new bars and everything opening up on Grand. So it's
In fact, it's probably even worse than Cody
going
River.
faster.
Yeah, they're going faster than Cody River Landing. They can't get around the roads in Cody River Landing. They can get cranking on Grand.
So how much money do we want to set aside for those projects? I think we should come up with an amount of money just for sidewalks and lighting
They
and,
said we did 200,000 for Cody River.
Can we do that for the rest of the city, for the residents?
So probably balance out the balance for the rest of the city, 200?
Well, I think we have the sidewalks here on Grand at 69 is what's currently budgeted, if I'm correct on that. So that's gonna, let's say hypothetically, you know, between engineering fees and everything else, that's gonna suck up that half of that right away without even blinking an eye. So, I mean, I'm thinking probably, you know, depending where our budget is overall, we probably want more if we're talking about the rest of the city now. I mean, look, we put 200,000 into Cody River Landing. What do we owe the rest of the city?
I'm comfortable budgeting a higher amount, and then if we don't use it, it just folds back in. So we could go up to 400,000 probably just for the rest of the city. If we spend it, great. If not, it goes back into CRA.
Right, I'm sure we can find projects to do. There's a lot of safety issues.
I'm 100% on board for 400 to throw out there.
And that's okay by consensus?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just going off memory. I can't think of anything else that we had earmarked other than the grant program, what we have for the Cody River Landing project, the 633, and now the 400 that we just talked about. Is there anything else that?
The only other thing might possibly be is if we do any changes to Nick's Park in lieu of getting rid of the ramps and converting to a park atmosphere like it was originally intended. So that's something we need to consider. I know when we talked to Chris from Ayers when he was here, they were looking into that as a possibility. So we might want to consider some funds set aside for that.
Well, where do we have the Cody River Landing place? Because that's phase one's $500,000.
That's out of our CRA, and that's this year, I would
But I
think.
think at that point we weren't considering actually putting
Nick's, correct.
money into Nick's Park.
Well, and not until phase two, because then that's where that.
And then we were talking about, I think, at the point, we initially budgeted one year, I remember $125,000. The bids came back at $250,000 to $300,000 to fix the ramp. So I think we need to look at that, because there's gonna be additional expense if we do want to change that besides what that initial.
Or fix it up, depending, you know, either we convert it or we leave it the way it is and fix it up to either a pay and kind of make it generate itself, or however that works. It's gonna take money,
Personally,
no matter what we
more
do.
people in the city would get used to that, a park with gazebos and barbecues and places like that than they do the county backing up as a ramp. Besides, once Cody River starts to get developed, we're gonna have more and more people coming. And I can see Saturdays with that one way and the boats and trucks being blocking the entire way into the Cody River.
That's one of the concerns I have as well. I think it really detriments what we're doing and the businesses. You try and get to lunch down there and you can't get through. It's just, right. What I would think is that I think that we were talking about our portion of that boat ramp was around 150,000, 175.
Well,
And it
no,
was,
how it
Our
happened
bids
was the
came back
county
at
said that they were
250.
going to work with us on this project. I've got with John several times, I got with Mike Wells on this project, and they said, yes, there's money available, we're in to help you. And we asked, and the time they got around to it, they said, yeah, we spent all that money.
Yeah, my conversations with the county were subsequent to yours, and by the time I got there, they made it clear there was no money for Port Richey.
but going back before that, what happened is we originally had, I think, 125 or 150, and it was going to be a matching grant to fix that ramp.
No, we estimated the whole project to be 125 to 150.
But the bid came in at like 250 or something.
250.
Right.
Right.
So the question is, if it was going to take, for example, 250 to fix that ramp, instead of fixing the ramps, shouldn't we put that same amount of money into the park?
My point is, with 250, I think we could make that into an outstanding grant.
But I think that's the number we should use, is what it would cost to fix the ramp anyways, and we'll put that in something
Yeah,
else.
but before we start throwing money into Nick's, not that we shouldn't, I'm
No,
not.
it's just going into a
Yeah,
received pile.
Right.
but shouldn't we wait until we get the conceptual of what we're doing in that entire area?
Because it may be
See-
baked in.
Yeah, maybe we're combining, you know, maybe it should be, instead of 250 for Nick's Park, maybe it should be 750 for phase two, or whatever the case is.
Either way, we should be looking at setting that money aside for these individual things.
Right, even if we add it to phase two, that's fine, however you want to put
Yeah,
it.
I'm just trying to figure out how best to,
Right, it's
yeah.
like this, so, but I think that's in the conceptual at the time, that was just gonna be, I don't think they were doing anything, that was just gonna be a boat ramp, and that wasn't gonna be even in the money.
They were gonna do the 10 feet in front of Next Park for the walkway or whatever it was.
We're talking about making substantial changes down there, so I think we do need to think about what money put in the pot, so to speak, even if we don't use it or things change, but we should come up with some kind of a number to think about. I'm thinking if we do the 250 number, that was just the same amount to fix a ramp. And I think that would go a long way to making that back into a park.
I've asked Ayers, and they've agreed to include in their conceptual plans that park not having a boat ramp. And so they're working on that. You'll have, when they've got that done, they'll have pictures and, give you some idea of what it could look like without a boat ramp. Obviously, if you still want to keep the boat ramp, you can go that other way. I think for budgeting purposes, it does make sense to appropriate the money, approve the expenditure of the funds. If we need to, if we needed 100 for the park and 200 for sidewalks, we can do that. But if we don't appropriate it, it's going to sit there another year.
So can we just appropriate it for that area, whether it goes through Ayers or to the park itself?
Yes.
Well, Ayers is already paid for on the park, right? Essentially.
Yeah, but we're just talking about changes to the park itself.
Well, I guess what I was saying, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, we've got X number of dollars in the bank, CRA funds. If you don't specify in a CRA budget that those funds are to be expended, they're going to sit there another year. And we can make it fairly general, fairly, improvement projects across the city, or give it a title, but you authorize the expenditure of those funds.
So phase 1 of the Cody River improvements, i.e. Treadway, we have already appropriated that, correct? Or we have not appropriated that?
I don't believe we have.
No, we have not.
So if we haven't appropriated, we have to appropriate phase.
That one
We have
first.
to appropriate phase 1 first before we start getting to
Phase 2.
Nix Park and phase 2.
How much was phase 1? I don't remember off the top of my head.
We were ballparking $500,000 to $750,000.
Why don't we appropriate 750, which is going to eat up most of the rest of that, and we'll call it a day for now.
There you go.
Comply with that.
And I went to law school for a reason. I don't know what the math is on this here. So you 750.
He's gonna get all done and say, we have $1 million left to spend.
750 plus 2 plus 50.
Plus 633. You got 400. You got.
633.
That comes back.
So
That'll come back next year though, which will be phase 2 for Nix Park. I love government accounting.
So I have it right at 1,900,000.
4,900,000.
One million.
Oh, I thought he said 4,900,000.
Which would leave us a small balance moving forward if we did that, if we appropriated that.
Yes.
Maybe you can appropriate it and not use it, correct? I mean,
No, and then it'll just
roll it
roll.
back over again.
Yeah, and then the fund balance will just be higher next year. Sure. But I think that was one of the criticism I think that we're going to get in the audit is we should really earmark and talk about these things. So I like
So what, do we
having
have like 300,000 left over?
somewhere in there. Yes.
No, I don't think so, because we're actually about 1.9, not 2.
Yeah, you would have appropriated everything in the fund balance.
So we fully appropriated that
Yes.
balance, more
Yep.
or less?
Yep.
Okay.
I was gonna say we're right at that.
Okay.
Then they can't complain we're not spending the money.
All right. So does that close out all the line items that everyone wanted to address on the CRA?
One question, oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh. We have, out of the CRA, we have the, bear with me. Oh, sorry, no, wrong fund. That's Penny for Pasco, sorry. I'm done with CRA.
So that's utility, stormwater. I think Penny for Pasco was the only thing that was left that we haven't touched on. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that, you ready to go on that one?
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
So we have our roll forward fund balance from FY20 of 1.356 million. And then based on our past budget discussions, we had appropriated about $625,000 for various police and fire items, as well as the cruiser lease that we currently pay for. So we're looking at an ending fund balance in FY22 of $317,000.
317?
Yes.
What's our current balance now?
This year, we've spent $700,000. The appropriation was 1.5.
So we're gonna have carry over.
So I estimated about $385,000 that we were carrying forward. And that I don't believe I included that at the time.
And out of that 385, how much additional are we going to get next year, projected?
About $450,000 in revenue, but I did include that in our estimation of the ending fund balance, the 317.
That was included in the 1.7, is that what you're saying?
So we have our roll forward fund balance of 1.3. I'm anticipating revenue of $450,000. And then our estimated budget expenditures were $785,000, so I deducted that. So we were left with about $1 million to spend. And then we made our appropriations for police and fire, and that brought it down to 317.
And is that after taking out all the police cars? Because we were making payments on police cars.
Yes, that's including the cruiser's lease as well.
Does that include new police cars as well, paying cash for them?
Yep, it includes the 6 cruisers lease and the 3 brand new cruiser lease.
So 3 new ones coming this year?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's an outright purchase, not a,
It's a lease to purchase.
Yeah, we did that. We paid cash for the fire truck and we did the finance on the police cars.
but you said there's 3 new cruisers, they're under
That
the
we have
leases?
not leased to purchase, but they're on this, this budget that we had already gone
Well,
through.
no, I think we have so right now you're looking at 9 new cruisers, 6
Correct.
have been lease purchased.
Correct,
And
previously.
right now you're purchasing 3
more
new
for this
ones.
year.
Yes, correct, yep.
Yes.
So-
3 more.
So, but I think the question from that end is why wouldn't we lease purchase those 3 and free up some of that cash balance?
That's included in the estimation, I believe.
So the 3 that we're purchasing would put us making payments on 9 cars?
Right, the chief had put in 3 cruisers every year to lease purchase them, to add them to the fleet.
The only danger to that is if we lose for Penny for Pasco, we don't have Penny for Pasco coming in and we have 9 cars that we're making payments on. We should probably address that now. I don't.
What was our finance term?
5 years, right?
5 or 6 years?
I think it was 5 years.
Forget.
That's a big problem.
We're gonna have an overrun.
Yeah, but that's going to come out ad valorem if Penny for Pasco goes out.
Assuming they kill Penny for Pasco.
What's that?
Which they've been trying to kill Penny for Pasco for 20 years.
Every year.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think by statute it comes up for referendum again in 3 years. If it doesn't pass, because I know Hernando just had one and it was a half penny for Hernando and they said no way. So I'm really nervous about Penny for Pasco here in Pasco. And I think we should plan for not having Penny for Pasco just in case. And if we get it, great. If we don't, we won't be taking a hit in our ad valorem taxes.
If you don't get it, then that's your 2 points that we've always been a difference, but Newport Rich is going to go up the same 2 points, so we'll still be back where we started at.
I don't know if we'll exist as a city if we're up around 8 mils. I think that's a problem for this city. Eventually that's.
I know we have to look at loss of Penny at Pasco, but we can't make all our decisions on not having it either. So, I mean, you have to look at it both ways. So maybe we have to look at reducing the number, or instead of doing 3, do 2, or something like that.
Here's the other problem. If you outright purchase those vehicles right now, let's say we outright purchase those vehicles, that'll probably bring your Penny for Pasco down to 150 net cash.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it, and the 181 was to outright purchase them.
Oh,
That's
so they
not
are
the lease.
outright-
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out.
That makes a lot more sense.
That makes a big difference.
The question is, I think originally we had talked about 2 vehicles every year because we bought the 6.
Initially, we did.
And I want to know if the police department can get by with 2 instead of 3. Is it that time of year?
The issue that we have is we're still overpaying for vehicle maintenance. This year I had to take $8,000 from other funds to supplement the vehicle maintenance, and we're down to about $50 to get us through the rest of this month without me having to take it from some other fund. And unless we upgrade this fleet, then that is going to continue. Just because of the age where we have 2003 cars, we have 2008 cars, and it's just not feasible, it's not physically responsible to keep putting money into old vehicles. Now down the road, once we get to the point where we have everyone in SUVs, and as you know, when we purchase vehicles now, we purchase them with the maintenance package. So therefore, the newer the fleet, the less money it's going to cost us to maintain them. So we get to a certain point, and I can't tell you exactly where that is, whether it's 2 years or 3 years, then we could look at lowering the number of vehicles we replace. But we got to get to a certain point because it's been neglected for so long.
Can I ask this? Can we budget for 3, but when it comes up, can we talk about the need for 2 versus 3 and look at the vehicles we're replacing? Because it's going to come on for approval at some point.
That's come to us anyway.
Right.
So
We'll
might as well
talk
budget
about
for
it.
the 3, and you can always cut it back.
And then cut it back if we don't need it. Are you guys okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So we'll budget for 3, and then we'll talk about whether there's a need for 2 versus 3 at the time.
So basically, the budget sits where it is then, because you have 3 budgeted
Correct,
for
yeah, I
purchase.
would say the
Yeah.
same.
The only other question, the ones that are amortized, we still have 4 years on those payments, correct?
Yes, they end in 2024.
So if Penny for Pasco dies out, then you only have 1 year of payments
Okay.
Yeah.
to cover. Other than the 3 vehicles you're going to have to buy, because I think we have 18 on the road now, more or less, 18 vehicles from day-to-day service. So that, how long do they last typically? 6 to 7 years?
Yes, actually. Unless it's a Crown Vic, then they run forever.
Yeah.
And I believe when we talked before, we were talking about a 6-year delta on those vehicles, and that's when the vehicle maintenance package is
Rolled
done.
up. So basically, we're at a 3-year or a 3 car per year replacement cycle.
Okay.
Like I said, we'll budget for the 3, and we'll see how it goes.
All right. For Penny for Pasco, were there any other questions?
And we budgeted for his pretty little boat, rowboat.
Yes, $100,000.
That was all I had. Your boat's getting smaller and smaller every day.
Is there any discussion on the police boat issue?
No, but like Todd, I think mentioned at the last, we are at the epitome of pricing on boats right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we could put it off,
I
know that trend will curve back down. The boating industry is very cyclical.
think you're going to see a substantial used boat market explode in about a year and a half or so.
No, I agree. What I was going to ask is a suggestion is we have 6 cars. How much would it cost to pay those 6 cars off? And if we offset it with that 100,000, can we pay those cars off and not owe any money on any cars?
It was $181,000 for 3 vehicles.
So if we didn't get a boat and we paid the cars off, would we have the extra $81,000 to do that?
To do what?
No, you'd still be short.
Yeah, 20,000.
Yeah, you know, you're doing that reverse math. You're doing that lawyer math.
No,
Don't
no,
do
no.
that.
So you owe 181 on the cars, right?
You're negative,
181 on the cars, you take the 100,000, instead of getting a boat, put that towards the cars.
So you're left with 81,000.
Still
81, but we have that we have enough in penny for Pasco just to pay that off then.
Yeah, remaining fund balance.
Which, are you talking about the 6 cars or the 3 cars?
The 6 cars.
No, that's not the 181. That's a different
That's
number.
like 3.
Yeah, that's like 3.
3 new cars,
Cars are
181,000.
60,
We're only 1
60,
year worth.
70.
Yeah.
So how do we know? How much do we owe on that? Do we know?
The lease, we owe 234,000.
There.
So if you put 100, then you owe 134.
Correct. But you would then have it theoretically paid off by the time Penny for Pasco dies.
Right, you take it off that.
Is that something you guys want to consider? I would much rather pay off cars than buy a boat.
I hate paying interest on anything.
At 2%, I'll pay interest on everything, so.
It's just an option. I wanted to put it out there. I'd much rather pay the cars off before we look at buying a boat if we can.
Well,
I don't know the need for the boat out.
For the police boat.
I'm against buying a boat in this fiscal year because I think we're just
We can't.
way overpaying.
We can, for sure.
That's it?
You can spend it on anything you want.
Oh, I got you.
It's general fund money.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Just because it's labeled doesn't mean.
Because it's labeled, you could spend it on anything, the 100,000.
Right.
What was general fund? I thought the 100,000 was at a penny
No,
for Pasco.
Penny for Pasco, you can spend it on anything.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just a revenue source.
No, I got you. But we've always used it for the vehicles.
Penny for Pasco.
Right.
It's always worked out that way.
Right.
Yeah.
But if we have it,
If you're taking the extra 100,000 and taking off the $200,000+ loan, you're right, either that or we're basically cutting our term, shortening up our term, and we would be paid for with the 6 cars before possibly Penny for Pasco.
Yeah, so theoretically, you would have 3 cars plus the 6 cars all paid off in full, and then in another year, theoretically, you'll have another 3 cars of brand-new cars. So you'll have a new fleet, or what, half a new fleet, 3/4 of a new fleet, paid off and done by the time Penny for Pasco.
if we're going to make
figures out.
if we're going to make payments on the vac truck, I'd prefer to pay off the other cars and only have.
Well, like what Jim was saying.
It's a different fund balance.
$100,000 in there, whether it's labeled boat or not, it's still accessible. We could.
Right.
But that's gonna come before council again, if we're gonna make purchases.
But if we're not going to buy a boat,
All you're doing is taking the line item off, scratch out the word boat, $100,000 is still.
okay. Well, I guess the first item. What's everyone's opinion on purchasing a boat in this fiscal year?
I think Todd said the first time we discussed it, it is right now.
Definitely.
I mean, I come from the marine industry and it's as high as it's ever been right now.
So we're going to scratch the boat off the budget then for the 100,000 by consensus.
So we keep the $100,000 in the budget, we just.
Yeah,
We're scratching the boat from earmarking it, right?
We're not labeling
Correct.
it boat, we're labeling
Name
it
boat
something
off
else.
of
Okay.
It would go to fund balance.
So I guess can we reallocate those resources is where I'm going.
I'm sure we can.
Yeah, you can, yep.
I know we can. Would you guys want to do that, or are you guys against that?
Well, I think we just keep it in the budget and we can discuss it at the time. I don't think we have to make that decision at the moment. We just.
Understood. So we can put it on for a council meeting and talk about it. Okay. So that's all I had
I'll
on that
vote for
issue.
you.
One shiny boat or 3 shiny boats?
We have a shiny boat. Those guys have
Yeah,
one.
he's got all kinds of boats.
It's red.
So were there any other line items out of Penny for Pasco that anyone wanted to discuss?
Oh, not in for Penny for Pasco, but I did have one item in CRA that I forgot to
What
mention.
page number?
77.
So we're going to close Penny for Pasco and back to CRA?
Oh, yeah, I'm done with Penny for Pasco.
Is everyone done with Penny for
I'm
Pasco?
fine with
Okay. What page were we on?
77,
Okay.
Community Redevelopment Fund.
Yeah.
I know there's been a lot of sensitivity to salaries in the CRA, the salaries drawn from the CRA. And we have a 240% increase in salaries in the CRA. Do we have sufficient justification to maintain a 240% increase, 242% increase in salaries within the CRA? And maybe I'm looking at that incorrect.
That's due to new positions as well, the administrative, the executive position, as well as the grants administrator.
I know there's been a lot of pushback, and maybe you could speak more eloquently to it than I regarding the salaries in the CRA, but are we comfortable with this?
I'm assuming this increase is also these salaries that we divvied up on how much is to CRA and how much is to the other funds.
Yes, we looked at the percentages and reallocated them according to what their jobs are. And like I said, we added 2 new positions in there, so that's why there's a large increase in that salary. The grant coordinator and the executive secretary position.
I think the grant coordinator is an easily defendable position.
And
I'm just concerned about the optics, where we've been driving down impacts on the CRA from salaries, and we just took all that right back in one budget year. And are we comfortable with that?
Yeah, going from 86,000 in 17-18 down to 48,000 in 2021.
That's what we've been working towards for a very long time.
Yep, I know.
And then we went right back to before 2017.
But it's not like we've increased it, we have added positions that we didn't prior.
Well, the
But
grant,
the complaint was always for
Spending it on salaries.
spending it on salaries in the CRA.
yeah, but they're talking about police officers and firefighters, which should come out of general fund. That's what they were, for the most part, referring to.
I just want to make sure we
So-
have the talk track.
Okay.
Plus the receipts.
No, I got
Well,
you.
I-
So,
No,
I can get you the receipts, because what Rachel and I did was go through every position and say, how much of that person's time is actually defensible? A certain amount of my time, a certain amount of legal, a certain amount of finance, but we tried to make that, legitimize it so that you could defend it. If somebody said, why is this position 20% and that one's 40? Well, because 20% of this person's time supports the CRA in our estimation. Now, you can argue, you think it's 15 or you think it's 25. But what we tried to get away from was, we need $50,000 in this fund, let's just take it out of CRA. So we went through position by position and tried to make a best guess as to how much of that person's time and salary. And if you'd like, we can get you that sheet where we went through all of
So
that.
it's
But-
basically $65,000 with the two positions divided up, and that's their portion of their salary that's designated to CRA.
The grant coordinator itself is allocated 80% to that fund because it's primarily
that's-
working on CRA.
I just want to make sure, sitting here right now, when the question is asked, because that'll be the first thing that they look at, 240%.
The same people though that asked us about, we need to get a grant writer, so.
I just want to make sure we have the talk track
Yep.
set forth, because that's a big number that they're going to zero right in on.
We're also working on updating the document that lists out all the salaries that are charged to the CRA fund and the justification for why they're being charged there, what they
That's
actually do
perfect.
for that fund, so.
Because at some point, it's going to be going to some news reporter somewhere is going to be asking that question, likely.
We have an answer.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the answer, so clearly my job is
I
to
am
bring
too.
you
Yeah.
into a level of comfort and get you the information you need. But,
Okay.
we were very deliberate in, at least in Rachel and I's eyes, trying to make sure that the numbers we were putting in were defensible.
Okay.
And the positions that are funded out of the CRA are positions that are supporting the CRA to that extent. Our clerk, there's a certain amount of her time that supports the CRA pays for that. And so, like I said, we did that with each line. I'll get you the information.
If you could,
If
yeah,
It
if
that'll-
you
was
could
in,
just give me
it was
that
in the
breakdown.
last budget presentation, actually, so
But-
you
Okay.
you should
the
have it.
question is whether or not that do we have to post those things like on the CRA website? I know that there was posting requirements. Does that include expenditures on salaries?
I believe in the budget, yes.
Okay.
Post the budget.
Okay.
So, yeah, that'll be a public document.
Somebody's going to be looking at it. And they're not going to have all that backup necessarily.
that's why we went through it painfully line by line, because it does need to be defensible. It wasn't just random, it wasn't just, hey, we need 50 grand. It was, how much time do we think the clerk actually spends supporting the CRA? If that's 10%, fine. If it's 50, fine. And then we can argue about the number, you know, if you think it's 40 instead of 50 or whatever. But it was treating the CRA as it is, like a separate entity. How much clerk time would you need to buy to support the operation of the CRA? And we were comfortable, we are comfortable with those numbers. We'll
Send them over
see
to
if we
me.
can bring you to
Sure,
that
I'll be
level of
comfortable as
comfort.
well.
Okay.
That's all I had, sorry.
Mr. Kinsella?
Okay.
And I think that covers the waterfront on all our fund balances and funds. Anything else,
I have nothing else unless there's any questions.
City Manager?
I'm good. We'll put it together and
Okay.
as you have directed.
And we're looking for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Didn't he want to?
Oh,
Yeah.
Mr. Mueller, come on up. That's right, I forgot we passed you.
Thank you. Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. I think we need to get back in a corporate environment and assign targets and hold departments accountable to a certain spend level. That's not difficult to do. Somebody needs to make a bold move, and it comes from the top, and the council and the mayor. Certainly you have the ability to set those kinds of targets. And if you're trying to accomplish growth and reduction of tax rates and millage rates, those are all things, and I appreciate your time here tonight looking at that stuff. But at some point in time, we're going to cross that bridge where targets are going to need to be assigned. One of the other things that I noted, it might be beneficial to help explain the salaries. If the salaries land in their respective departments and then have a separate line item showing the allocation out of one fund into another, so you can see what's happening there, what the gross salary is in that group, and then what portion was allocated out. I believe the way the thing is being accounted for now, it's all buried in there, so you really can't see the allocation. It might lend some clarity to those numbers. You guys spoke about the dredging in the CRA for 633. As I recall, I believe the fund was, or the quote was 7 something. So we're short by 633. You probably need to move that number up, because I thought the quote that we had, and that's now a stale quote, so it's no longer valid. That's probably more like 800,000 now. So you're probably short a couple $100,000 there. And for the chief, you might not get a boat, but you might be able to get a motor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. That's all that we have here for a public commentary, so we're going to close that out and look for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.